Thanks, Chloe.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Like Chloe said, I'm Ronnie, formerly Veronica, but go by Ronnie. And I was a former VISTA actually for America Scores New York. So I've been in your spot before. I know Kim and Chloe very well. And then in 2019, I was hired full time as their marketing and communications manager. So I've been doing that pretty much this whole time for almost 5 years now. And I just want to flag for everybody right now that I did not study marketing in college. I did not study communications in college. So everything I learned about marketing, comms, development, I learned working at America Scores. So I'm sharing with you what I learned when, sorry, my mic just got super weird. And hopefully it can be helpful for you in some way. So we can go to the next slide, Chloe. So we have just like a brief agenda covering 4 topics. We're going to talk about creating engaging content with what I normally use, which is Canva and Adobe. We're going to learn about organizing ourselves, which is a huge, huge part of running social media accounts, how to stand out and engage with your audience when everyone is trying to stand out and engage with the same audience. And then a quick success story and some questions. Again, I know probably every single person on this call has posted on social media in some capacity. So if you have tips or tricks that work for you, please put them in the chat or feel free to raise your hand because this is just an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other. So topic number 1, using Canva and Adobe. There's a lot of platforms that you can use to create content on social media. When I initially started at our organization, I was using primarily Google Drawings, which was helpful in some ways and definitely not helpful in others, kind of limited what we were able to do. Chloe remembers how ridiculous our early flyers used to look that came from Google Drawings. But since then, there are a lot of opportunities to get free mediums to be able to create content. The one I use the most is Canva. I use Canva to create this presentation. I use Canva to create 90% of our content, most of our decks, all of our flyers. Canva is the way to go. If you work at a nonprofit, you can get the free premium plan. Please do that, even if you don't plan on using it. I was paying for ours for far too long before I realized you could get it for free. You just have to submit your 501c3 for your organization, and it's all yours to use. The most helpful thing I find in Canva is being able to create your own branding package. So I know all of you probably have rules at your organization that say you have to use specific fonts, specific colors, and your logo in a specific way. Which is really important to make sure that you stand out and are distinguishable as your organization. But it kind of can be a pain to make sure you get the perfect color and the perfect font constantly. So the beautiful part about Canva is that you can kind of create the package on your own. So any text you use, the default will be your organization's font. Any color you use, the first 5 that come up will be your organization's colors. And it can make it really easy to get creative without steering away from your branding and from your messaging. Something they also provide are like a ton of template options, which can be great depending on who your audience is. So if there's something that's a little bit more fun, a little bit more engaging, a little bit more in your face, it's something that I like to use when we're doing branding or posts that are specifically targeted towards our like alumni, high school students who are getting content constantly and you want something to stand out. But they also have templates that are a little bit more formal, a little bit more conservative, that are more helpful when you're doing a corporate presentation or a corporate deck. Again, it's really about knowing who your audience is and what your goal is at the end of the day with that audience. And then in addition, it also provides some photo editing tools so you can kind of isolate an image. You can do any basic like color correcting or any like fun drop shadows or stuff like that. You can all do it within that, which is really, really helpful. So you don't have to be downloading a million versions of the same photo that have been like slightly tweaked, because that makes your desktop a nightmare, because my desktop is 90% of the time a nightmare because of that. And then finally, this may not apply to everyone, but it allows you to Google Drive sync, which again is really helpful for my desktop. I don't have to download the same photo 80 times. I can just sync it with my Google Drive and pull any content I need straight out of there. So that's really, really helpful. And Canva also kind of like archives all the photos and content that you've uploaded to use, so you can always go back to it. On the other hand, there's also Adobe. Adobe is typically a paid for platform. So if you use Adobe Illustrator, Adobe InDesign, Photoshop, Lightroom, you typically have to pay for those, and those are apps that you have to install onto your computer. Adobe Express, it used to be called Adobe Spark. It was Adobe Spark when I started this presentation, and it is Adobe Express today. It's free and it's a website. So you don't have to pay for Adobe. You don't have to download something onto your computer. It's something that's accessible simply through a URL, which is really helpful. Similarly to Canva, it allows you to create your own branding package with fonts and new colors and your logo. It allows for a lot of different template options depending on what your content is. And it also allows photo editing tools. The main difference, I think, is that Adobe is a little bit like edgier, slightly more creative, and kind of leans a little more corporate, I think, when it comes to what the template options are. So I tend to lean more towards Canva. You can kind of achieve the same thing, but I encourage you to explore both, just because they're both free, and I find uses for both of them. But typically I prefer Canva. Our program team has also utilized Canva for student facing content, and it's really helpful for them too, but definitely look at both. Yeah, Canva, like Rebecca said, Canva is definitely more user friendly. It's a lot easier to learn, and it lets you keep those photos. The biggest thing is lets you keep those photos. With Adobe, you have to go in and find the same photo on your drive or your desktop every time, which is just like a nightmare. I hate doing that. So I typically go to Canva. But sorry, I can't really hear you. All right, throw it in the chat. I'll keep it moving, but please share, because that's really, whatever you said was probably really helpful. But yeah, some big tips for using both is obviously trying to utilize your organization's photos. That's not always easy to do. I know a lot of us are working with a limited budget, and it's not always so easy to get a quality photographer down to programming. But if you have the opportunity to get a photographer, a volunteer photographer to your programming or an event 2 to 3 times a year, I really, really encourage it. It's easier to work with those photos, and you'll have content for like years to come, especially if you're working for marketing materials, for pop-up banners. Those are the kind of photos you want to use. And there's a lot of websites like Catchafire or like Volunteer, like NYC Volunteer, for example, that you can get people who are used to doing that. Get creative. I know that's said easier said than done, because sometimes you just kind of get in a funk of creating content. But just try to play with the templates a little bit. I think that's why the templates are super helpful. And you can still make it look like your organization when you stick to your branding materials as much as you can. And then this one is maybe slightly controversial, but I really, really utilize researching other organizations, especially really big ones that have the marketing budget and staffing and resources that small orgs don't typically have, because they can spend the money into researching analytics and engagement and like user content that we just don't have the funding for. So in a way, like, let them do the work and you can reap some of the benefits. It's only borrowing, it's not stealing, it's learning with each other, I think. But that's where I've learned the most, is following other organizations who've had similar missions, who serve a similar demographic, a similar population in a similar area, is learning from the content they create. I found that really, really helpful throughout the last few years. Any questions? Exactly. Nothing is, especially on social media, like nothing is original. We're all learning from each other. And I think that's kind of the idea with nonprofit world, especially. So take advantage of it. Please throw any questions about this into the chat, because I know it was kind of a lot of information for the first slide, but if you have any questions, please go for it. And if not, we can go to the next slide whenever you're ready, Chloe. Perfect. Organizing socials. This is probably the most tedious part of this whole like series of doing social media, because it's like the annoying organization part. But it's annoyingly also kind of the most important part, because you know what's coming up. There's nothing like being told at like 4:30 p.m. on a Friday that you had to get a post up for that week, and now you're scrambling to fit it into the end of the day or fit it into the following week. So for example, what I do every year, our fiscal year starts September 1st. I just go based off the fiscal year because it's just easiest for us. And I work backwards. So I put all the months out and I pick out days that I know we're going to have to post on socials. So big event days, program days, the days of our gala, those are days that I know I will be absolutely posting on Instagram. I'll do the planning in advance. So I'll put the week before, the week before that, the week before that. And then from there, I can go on to our themed days. So for example, America Scores is an organization that primarily runs soccer, poetry, and civic engagement programming. So April is a big month for us. It's National Poetry Month. So I know National Poetry Month is going to be a lot of poetry focused content. I know in January, we're going to be posting a lot about Black History Month. We're going to be hearing a lot about Women's History Month in March. So these are big things that we know we have to focus on. February is Black History Month, and I said January, but these are like days that we kind of structure our year around. And with those theme days, do what fits your organization's mission. So for example, if you're a STEM organization, today is like a big day for you. It's May 4th. It's Star Wars Day. Post about that. People will engage. I think it's also like National Interpreter Appreciation Day. So if you're an organization that works with people who speak a lot of different languages and you rely on interpreters a lot, it's a perfect opportunity to post about them today, because it not only recognizes the work of the people you're working with, but it also selfishly fills one of your social media days. I typically don't like to post more than 3 times a week on Instagram specifically, because the algorithm is kind of a mess, but it really is dependent, and you just kind of have to see where it works, especially during the pandemic. The typical structure of people will look at it first thing in the morning, we'll look at it at lunch, and then we'll look at it at the end of the day, doesn't really fit when people are working from home. So when you're planning your social media and you're taking some of your 10 VISTA PTO days, you're going to have to post during those times. That's when you can utilize websites like TweetDeck and Buffer. TweetDeck is great. You can post tweets in advance. I don't even know how long in advance, but I'm assuming it's pretty limitless. And then Buffer allows you to post on every other platform. They include Twitter, but you're limited to a certain amount of accounts when you're using the free version. So I recommend using TweetDeck for Twitter and Buffer for Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Tagging gets a little bit iffy, but once you get used to it, it's pretty straightforward to use. A lot of the other ones require you to pay in some capacity. You cannot track analytics through that. But to be honest, if it's just posting while you're out, highly, highly recommend. And then speaking of analytics, try to use them as much to your advantage. You heard me just talk about, posting times and days depending on the pandemic, really depending on the time of year. Summer changes the game, at least for us, entirely. So just always take a look. A lot of organizations, particularly with Instagram, have a business account. And so you can look into your analytics. You can do the same for Twitter through engagement. You can get an overall picture of your engagement through socialblade.com. I use that a lot for our platforms. And just, analyze what you want out of your social media. So for us, fundraising isn't our direct goal with socials. It's really to increase engagement, increase interest in the organization. So we don't measure our analytics by dollars raised. The only time we do really turn to that is things like Giving Tuesday, when you hear a lot about Giving Tuesday through social media. But again, that's not kind of like the direct goal of our social media. Tuesday and planning out your year. Yeah, I can definitely share my calendar. I'm not promoted by Canva by any means, but I do use Canva to create our social media calendar, just because I just find it the easiest to use. It's really easy to structure, and I can kind of customize it to myself, but there's templates through Canva that are also calendar based that are helpful. So I can share with Chloe and Kim and Danielle after this what our social media calendar looked at, like if you wanted to take a look, and how we fill in those days, because I find that really helpful. And another thing to do throughout the year is to take advantage of campaigns. Again, I talked about National Poetry Month. That's a shorter 1-month campaign that we either do ourselves as an organization or with the other organizations nationwide that are part of our larger organizations, like our other affiliates. But that's something that kind of has an end goal. We also have like really long campaigns. So we have a 2030 vision strategy that we started in 2019. So that's pretty much a 10-year campaign. And then we have our smaller ones. So this year we have a Meet the Mentor campaign that we're highlighting mentors and coaches that work at our organization from, January to December. We're going to be highlighting these coaches. It not only, again, fills your social calendar, but it allows you to kind of create a story bank and an arsenal of stories you can tell to funders, to volunteers, to donors, to anybody that is interested in your organization. You can pull out these stories and be like, this is evidence of the work we do. And that's like far more important than a lot of people realize, because even though quantitative data is huge, I'm not a math person, I'm not a numbers person, but you tell me like a moving story and I'm sold, which is probably not great, like in terms of being subjected to a lot of marketing, but you tell me a heartwarming story and I'm ready. And a lot of people are like that. So that's really, really helpful. And then trial and error is a huge, huge thing. Like, just give it a shot. Obviously, clear it with whoever you need to clear it with. But try things. Try posting at a different time. Try using, I don't really utilize hashtags because I don't find them as helpful on our end, but if you use hashtags, try different ones. Explore what works for your Instagram or for your social medias generally and what doesn't. Post different. We don't post a lot on Facebook. We haven't also posted a lot on Twitter recently because I don't know if any of you've seen this, but engagement has been kind of down. So we haven't been putting quite as much effort into Twitter as we have in the past. But again, trial and error. We might find that engagement skyrockets in the next 6 months, even though Elon Musk decided to buy it. So we will be like, oh my God, great. People are super into Twitter again. Let's just post on Twitter. So it's really about trying things out. Some things will work, some things won't, and some things that work today may not work a month from now. So it's all about giving it a shot. Just clear it with the people you need to clear it with. And the worst thing that could happen is you don't get a lot of engagement, and that's okay. You gave it a shot and you tried. I've never heard of Meta's Business Suite Planner. I'm glad this is recorded because then I'm going to come back to that. So thank you for mentioning that in the chat. That'll be really helpful. Okay, we can go to the next slide, Chloe. And then this is probably the hardest thing in the day and age of social media, is standing out. I've mentioned already clear branding throughout this whole conversation, but you probably have noticed, hopefully, that even though this is not a presentation that's for my organization, I've used a very specific color throughout this presentation. I've used a very specific font. There's an image in the background where you can see our logo. These were choices because this is what our branding is. And anyone can look at this presentation and say, oh, this is an America Scores New York presentation, because they're using the same colors, they're using the same fonts, they're using that photo, you can see their logo. That's huge, especially with the work that we're doing. There's a lot of organizations who are trying to do good work and want to be able to be seen and show people the good work they're doing. You want to be able to stand out to funders, to volunteers, to people who want to be engaged with your organization. A huge thing also is looking legitimate. So I've recently spoken to somebody who found us online, was Googling soccer organizations in New York City, and she came across our website and she saw how we branded everything, how we were clear with our visuals and our messaging. And she thought, oh, okay, this looks like a legitimate organization and not 8 people like cosplaying as a youth development organization. These people are actually showing that they're doing the work they say they're doing. So that's a huge part of it, is just the legitimacy, making sure people know that you are a real actual organization. Again, with strong visuals, I've already talked about photos a little bit. Again, really encourage you, when you can have the opportunity, to include photographers when you can, because that really will change the game. And there's a ton of volunteer photographers, especially in New York, who are really eager to help. And if you can, only do that 2 or 3 times a year, that will change the game for your organization if you have the opportunity to do that. Again, mixing up content is really big. And I know that sounds like kind of a mixed message when I'm talking about clear branding and then mixing up content. But for example, we're an organization that runs a lot of events. And there's times of the year that our fundraising events kind of overlap. So we'll be promoting our benefit and our corporate soccer tournament and the New York City Marathon, like kind of all at the same time. So if you look at our Instagram, it'll be like, does this organization like run youth programming, or do they just like host a bunch of events? And that's kind of something we want to avoid. So kind of being strategic about what you're posting, when you're posting it, trying to mix it up as often as possible. So sneaking in an event update, but then the next day throwing in a youth photo to remind people of what your mission is and who you are and what you're doing. And then I also like to do like little like statistics campaigns. So last summer we did a whole summer of, in addition to regular content, of highlighting our stats, you know, the percentage of youth we serve that excel in ELA after going through our poetry curriculum, or our attendance statistics after, you know, joining America Scores. Because like I said, some people are numbers people and some people are stories people. And I will never understand the numbers people, but the numbers people love numbers. So just making sure you're trying to hit as many people as possible with the content that you create. I know I keep talking about campaigns. There's a reason. I will talk more in depth about a campaign in a second. But if you can structure your year, your month around a story, around a theme, it will be supremely helpful in creating, again, an arsenal of stories for you and creating a structure to your month, year, etc. It really provides a guideline for people who aren't familiar with your organization to really get to know you and to get to know your work. This has been a really good opportunity for our organization this year to highlight coaches and mentors in a way we've not done before. And we've done about 3 so far because we're into May. And every single coach and mentor has really appreciated the opportunity to be highlighted as somebody who makes change in their school and with their team and in their community. So being able to do that won't just help like the culture of your organization, but it really gives you an opportunity to highlight this work and to build a story around that you can not only, you know, use for socials, but then you can go to media teams. You can talk to journalists, you can talk to people about this work you're doing, and all of it already exists. You don't have to, you know, pull something out of thin air. And then finally, which is probably the weirdest thing I've had to add to this presentation, is talking about referencing pop culture. And I know that sounds bizarre. And I know that's not easy to do when you're working with youth. But people underestimate, I think, how important it is to be paying attention to what's going on, especially when you're trying to engage an audience. So if you go to the next slide, Chloe, you'll see a graphic on the right that looks familiarly like Wordle. This is something I borrowed from a larger organization that works with refugee youth specifically. And they did a Wordle based on their organization. So what I did was an America Scores New York themed Wordle. Again, this was back in January. So again, it kind of is all about timing. I don't think I would post this now because the Wordle hype has kind of gone down a little bit. But we used all these words that people associate with America Scores. So scores, poetry, soccer, equity, leader, all to come to mentor, which you've heard me talk about a million times already, which was our big theme for the year. And it was an opportunity to plug our campaign while engaging people with something they were seeing all the time that they were familiar with, but they weren't familiar with in this context. So we were able to take something like pop culture and make it fit us, which was a really fun thing to do. And I hope people appreciated it as much as I enjoyed creating it. And then on the left, you'll see just like a screenshot of our current grid. This was probably like mid-April. And it does look like there's a lot going on. But if you look at it, you'll see that there's consistent colors, consistent fonts. There's not one image, I think, that an America Scores logo isn't visible. And there's a variety of photos of coaches, text photos, event updates, youth photos. And you kind of get like encompassed what America Scores is when you look at this grid. You see coaches, mentors, kids, soccer, poetry. That's pretty much us in a nutshell. So being able to make it very clear about who you are and what you do at your organization in any way you can is really, really huge. And providing that variety will continue to grow a diverse audience. And then finally, a success story. I'll brag for 2 seconds if I must. Um, Last year, we celebrated our 20th anniversary, and we took a page out of the Forbes book because they're known for doing their 30 under 30 and their 40 under 40 and so on. So we decided to celebrate our 20th anniversary by doing a 20 under 20 campaign. So we built out 20 stories from 20 young people who were under 20 years old at the time of this story that kind of expressed what America Scores is about, why they appreciated America Scores, what it's done for them. And we were able to use this throughout the entire year. So we started in January with Braden, which is why his looks slightly different because we refined the design a little far into it. And we ran it through June. So it was a lot of weeks of a lot of work and a lot of collaborating with program team, which I'm sure Chloe remembers, of getting these stories and getting in touch with these young people, their families and their coaches to build out their story. But it gave us the opportunity to tell 20 different stories that might touch different people in different ways. So me personally, I love Carla's story, but some people were really touched by Omima's story or by Serenity's story. And we're able to kind of use their story and their words to kind of express what America Scores has been about since 2001. And then from there, we were able to structure our entire year around that. So we were able to go to media and tell them a story about the 20 under 20. And we were able to go to our benefit and theme it around our 20 under 20. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that they had images of each of the 20 under 20 youth in the center of the table. And they were all there. They had the opportunity to speak. They had banners of their pictures on the side. As you can see on the stage, they were all of varying ages. Yasmin actually was our youth host. So we had this opportunity to really build our entire year around this campaign just from a social media story. And this was a great opportunity to include these young people into something that our young people don't often get included in, which is a fundraising event. And then from there, they were able to make connections with other people. So for example, one of our guests of honor was Robbie Earl. He's a professional soccer player who works for NBC as a sports commentator and analyst now. Muhammad, who is the tallest youth in that picture, has exchanged emails with him and has had conversations with him. And he's somebody he's respected and listens to his podcast and has really enjoyed his work for a really long time. I don't know if any of you know Kaya McCullough, who's also a soccer player, is also a really big activist with women's soccer. She was able to have conversations with a lot of these kids. And also Muhammad, again, who's interested in getting into law, she gave him his email because she has applied to law school and he wanted to connect with her about her process. So not only were we able as an organization to build out this whole story just around this social media campaign idea, but our young people, the people that we directly serve and partner with, were able to grow their networks and really see opportunity in being able to do this. And I think at the end of the day, that's the whole intention of this work, is to be truthfully and honestly telling the story of the incredible people that we all work alongside. So with all that being said, anyone has any questions? I've talked for a very, very long time. So I'll be happy to answer anything if I can be helpful. And I can share along my calendar or any other resources, obviously, at any point.
This was awesome, Ronnie. Thank you. And I actually did think of something when you were talking about getting a volunteer photographer out. And obviously, I know you take a lot of the photos too. So just any tips for like best strategies for when, you know, people are going out taking photos at program. I know a lot of people here probably do that. So just thinking, question on that.
For sure. Yeah. I kind of learned this the hard way, that do not try to take action photos with an iPhone. They will never look as nice as you think they will, unfortunately. But what I have found is that our, best used photos, actually a lot of the photos we use, like the one in the screen, has been taken with an iPhone. Just don't try to take a picture of a big group. If you can grab 3 or 4 people, use that. Really pay attention to your lighting. make sure the light is never behind you. It's not going to be a great photo. If you have portrait mode, utilize it to the best of your ability. But really try to focus on a group of a few people rather than trying to get this giant group photo, because it just won't translate the same. A lot of the photos in the 20 or 20 are iPhone photos, and then a lot of them aren't. But your iPhone's your best friend. As far as I'm concerned, 90% of our photos are taken on iPhone. And just being conscious of what the capabilities are. But yeah, our development director really was the one who was like, please don't take a group photo of 800 people with an iPhone. It's going to look insane. And he's completely right. 3 people up to 7 people, and get a good photo and make sure the lighting is facing them, and take as many as your heart will desire. If you take 1,000 photos, you'll have one perfect one. It happens to me every single time. I'll have 1 million photos of random kids and there'll be one perfect photo. So just keep snapping the pictures. Honestly, that's the biggest advice, is just keep taking pictures. Ooh, affinity designer sounds great. Yeah, volunteer match is great. NYC volunteers is awesome. I think people told me about Catch a Fire as well, that offer videographers. So that's really, really great. Also, if you, I know a lot of organizations get volunteer days with corporate partners, and some corporate partners aren't particularly interested in coming to programming in a way that requires them to volunteer hands-on in that way. So some might be interested in photography. So also utilize that to your advantage. Get a little bit creative with your corporate partners if they're interested in volunteering. I do love a good meme. I really get nervous when because we're youth facing. So I don't want to be too crazy with the memes, but if you can, a meme is always a good idea. Yeah. Also, Twitter is really great for those kinds of ideas. They had a red flag thing going around in October that I really wanted to do around our corporate soccer tournament, but I didn't think it would get the traction I would like, so I didn't bother.
Great. Well, if anyone has any other questions, I will put, if it's okay, Ronnie, to share your contact when we follow up with information. So we'll send out the recording and the slides, and all of this information that people are putting in the chat too is great just for resource sharing with all the Vistas. So thank you everyone for your participation here. And Ronnie, as a former Vista, it's really great to have you and just see, the growth that from since I started with you and then now at America Scores, how much success you've had with social media, and definitely some really great tips in there. So we'll make sure to share those out. And then maybe if you want to stick around just a couple minutes, if anyone wants to stay for any questions with a smaller group, if they're more comfortable, then we can do that. Thank you so much, Ronnie, and thank you everyone for being here today.